Welcome to Be My Guest Expert. It's a series of long-form interviews with Cityline's most familiar faces. In today's case, one we want to get to know a little better. I think we're actually going to get to know each other a little better here. So remember to subscribe to our channel if you enjoy watching these conversations. We definitely enjoy having them. I love having these conversations. So I want to mention this episode will go deep on topics that could be upsetting to some. Listen with care. Reference the resources in the show notes if you need to, because we'll put them out there for you so you can feel supported. I'm joined by the multi-hyphenate Myles Sexton. So good to have you here, Myles.
I'm so excited for this.
Always a joy. You lead with that energy, and we love it. So you're a style expert, an HIV and AIDS advocate,
Yes.
podcast host, and all-around bright light. And we actually met years ago when we were doing Cityline Real on Pride and talking about HIV positive and all of the advances and how you can live a beautiful life. But I want to talk about you starting on Cityline.
I know.
So, how did that? We are so lucky to have you as part of the Cityline roster, and you can tell that we feel lucky to have you, Myles, because you're on like every other week.
Oh my God, I feel so spoiled.
How did you land on the show? How did that all happen?
So it's kind of funny. I was like up visiting some of my friends up north, and they have this little like small town pride, and he like lives up there, and he usually brings like a group of people together. And one of the people that work for Cityline, his name's Rick. He was like, "Would you ever do TV?" And I was like, "You have no idea. It's like my dream to be on TV. Like I don't get to see someone like myself on TV."
Yes.
And like, you know, so I've just been really like trying to manifest this, and it was just kind of funny. Like that summer we had this conversation, and then a few months later I had our first episode last December, and it was just like, it was like a dream come true. So
So there's the dream, and then there's the reality.
Yes.
So I want to know how has it been? And you can critique us if you want, because we're also trying to learn and get better about welcoming everybody into our space. I see this as my living room, so when folks come in, like I want to make sure everyone feels very welcome. How's it been working on Cityline? How are we?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's been so incredible because it's just like, I feel like I've never been in a situation where I present these sort of ideas of like, let's do an episode on this type of inclusivity, you know, that's like goes beyond just like what we see on the surface, you know, and being able to like then just be met with like, yes, let's do it, you know, like I don't know, I always feel like I've had to try to like convince people to be like, especially when it comes to gender identity and like sexuality and things like that, it's like, you know, I've had to try to convince them to like even just give me like a little crumb to be able to like show this sort of representation. But with Cityline, I feel like you've all just opened with open arms, like, and allowed me to kind of be like, okay, this is my pitch idea, and like, let's do it.
Yes.
So I think that's so cool, and it makes me, you know, feel empowered, because I think a lot of the time, like, I'm also like, I think sometimes feeling shame or like just to even ask for those types of things, just based off of how I was raised in society, you know, as a young like non-binary queer person. And so it's like just really amazing to be able to be in an environment that is like so positive, you know, and wants to celebrate like diversity.
Absolutely. And I love that you're coming to us with all of these ideas. So you did a prom segment about non-gender based prom wear. We have talked about all sorts of different topics on the show. We've talked about you being a big hiker and outdoor lover. Is there any part of you that is thinking, I want to speak less about identity politics and more about sofas or like shoes, or like, do you find you have to strike a balance? Are you comfortable with where you're at right now on the show?
I think we're like at a very like pivotal part, I think, in society, where I think we're seeing like a really big moment of like of an evolution, I think, of mindsets, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think for me, it's like, I think it's just really exciting to be able to really like double click in, I think, to a lot of these areas where we just haven't been able to showcase it, you know, and that's not even just from like a gender identity perspective. It's like people with disabilities, you know, and like how are we showcasing them just in mainstream television? But that's not necessarily like showing, you know, just specifically adaptive clothing, but also just like having them as models.
Right.
You know, and I guess like with my entire approach, I feel like with the segments, I've been really trying to be like, okay, like how can I bring other people to the table that are maybe not necessarily like having a voice, but just get to have representation as well, like in a moment that we might be talking about something completely opposite of that, right? So
totally.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. I feel the same way. I know that in 2020, when all of a sudden racial disparity became this big thing, there were folks, we had this little coalition of Black broadcasters, and we were talking about it, and some of the broadcasters were saying, well, oh no, like from here on in, am I going to have to talk about Black issues?
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I want to.
Yes.
Like, I want to. This is an opportunity. I'll talk about it all day and all night. I'll never get sick of it. This is like the topic matter that I feel so happy that I can bring to the table. So I understand what you're getting at.
Did you find though that you had to like learn, like, were you like having to like even learn even more about like that subject, like once that sort of happened though for you?
I knew
like
a lot,
yeah, okay.
but yes, there was some learning to do.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the pressure, right?
Yes.
Because you probably feel like now you are emblematic of all of the folks that might be non-binary or queer positive, and so then the responsibility of that.
100%.
Like, you don't want to get anything wrong.
No,
you don't want to misinform or miseducate anyone, right?
Exactly. There's so many letters a part of like my community, right? And I'm just a small part of it. So, but it's like, yeah, it's true. I felt like when all of these sort of conversations started happening, it's like, how do I, okay, now I'm like reading as much as I possibly can about like other parts of my community that I don't know much about, because I just feel like everyone's turning to me to like answer these questions, and I'm like, not the expert always, you know?
Right,
but.
yeah. No, I hear you. It's a double-edged sword, right? Okay, let's talk about first impressions. So
yes.
I didn't know much about you, Myles, except what I had seen from galas and events. And at galas and events, I mean, this is Myles. I have to do it. Like, okay, so let's say we're at the cafes, like Myles has this going on. And then like they're walking in the room like this. So this is all I knew.
It's true, though.
I didn't know. Like, I didn't know you were, like, sweet and giggly. I didn't know any of that. So my first impression is, like, fashionista, right? And then when you come into the space and it's like you're all, like, sweet and huggy and affectionate and, like, I wasn't expecting any of that.
You know what's so interesting about this is that, like, I was so afraid to smile for such a large portion of my life. And I think it's, like, starting in the modeling industry, like, it's sort of, like, ingrained of, like, ooh, that blue steel, and that's sort of, like, what you have to do. But I also think it, like, went a lot deeper than that. It was just, like, I think for a huge part of my life, I think I used fashion very much as, like, a shield to kind of, like, so that people wouldn't ask like what was going on inside of myself. And to be quite honest, like I was very miserable. I was like overwhelmed with so much shame, I think, that I was like, I really used the fashion and like sort of this persona of, okay, I look incredible, so like no one can touch me. And like no one's gonna ask those deeper questions. And you know, through therapy and like a lot of soul searching and just self-help, it's like I've been like, no, like that's such a, yes, it's still a part of who I am, but that's not actually who I am. And this giggly, affectionate person is like actually how I want to be and how I want to like showcase myself in the world. And I think that's my most authentic self, but I was so afraid to show it.
That is so interesting to me, because fashion does have that we take ourselves serious.
Yes. Totally.
You know, which is why I think I've never really properly clicked into the proper fashion industry. Like there's a seriousness that I just can't co-sign.
For sure.
But what's interesting to me is the idea of having armor or having a shield.
Yes.
What was the cause of that, of the misery and the shame?
I think it was just, I was really like combating, I think, inside just, I think, accepting my divine femininity, and I think just also accepting my queerness, accepting my like non-binariness. It's like, I think all of these things, a part of me just so badly wanted to be normal, like quote unquote normal, you know, to fit into this sort of like mold that I think society creates for us, that I just was so like just miserable on the inside that it was like I didn't have the capability of like learning what it meant to actually like love myself. You know, and I really love this. She's like a kind of like a meditative leader and does these like really great classes. And something in one of her meditations she said was like, oh, like when was the last time that you like looked in the mirror and like told yourself that you love yourself and that you think that you're beautiful? And I remember like listening to that in a meditation, I just started crying because it was like, I think at that point in my life, I was 27 years old and I've never done that. And it's just like, oh, like, you know, and that really hits like deep. And it's like, no, like, I think I was leading so much more with like ego and armor and being like, look at me and look at how flashy I am and like, look at how successful I can be. And like, people like can't touch me. But it was like, I wasn't actually like dealing with, I think, my own shame of who I was on the inside, you know? And I needed to let go of that. So.
Makes perfect sense to me. It makes so much sense to me. But what a huge hurdle to have to get past.
Yeah.
And I know it's like it's a work in progress,
Totally.
right? So much inner work because society is really bombarding you with awful messages.
100%.
You know, so fighting that it's so much internal work, and then also like trying to figure out how to navigate all of that in the outside world. I can't even imagine. So. I want to go back because you're from a small town. You're from East Coast.
Yeah, so I grew up in Nova Scotia.
In Nova Scotia.
Yeah, it's ironically the little town was called Brooklyn. So like every time I go to volleyball camp, I'm like, I'm from Brooklyn, New York, but like with my thick East Coast accent. Wasn't tricking anyone.
Right, they're like Brooklyn, really. What was life like growing up as Myles?
I mean, I was super secluded, like in the town that we grew up in. We had like a little pizza shop and like a home hardware, and like that was it. You know, like it was under maybe 2,000 people. So, you know, it's funny because when I look back at like my childhood, like before I could really like comprehend shame, like I loved living there, you know, having the freedom of like just being able to use my imagination. Like my parents very much had this philosophy of like, they didn't want me watching TV or playing video games. It was like, go outside and don't come back in until the sun comes down.
Love it.
And I loved that. Like I was in the woods, just like making up these fantasy worlds in my head and like exploring and finding like little critters and like, you know, like it was amazing. But you know, I think as I got older and like, I think my like natural divine femininity was like, starting to like really take hold, I think, of how I wanted to express myself. And then that's where sort of the shame came in, you know, like I was surrounded by a group of very like masculine men. Like I think my grandfather, my father were both very like masculine figures in my life, you know, that just couldn't comprehend any sort of like acts of femininity, you know, like I wanted, you know, to dress up or wear my mom's heels and just like have fun, but I never like looked at it as like male or female. I was just like, oh, it's just cool. Like I think this is amazing that people get to wear something that's fabulous, you know? I never attached like a gender to it. So I think that was hard. Like I remember I was super obsessed with the Spice Girls. And Sporty Spice would always have like the little crop, and Sporty Spice was the only one I was ever allowed to like because I was a boy. And so I like had put clothespins like to make a little like bra kind of thing, and I was like dancing in the basement to like Sporty Spice, and I remember my mom like just like shamed me so hard for like having this moment. And it like I think that from that moment I just was like, okay, I can't show this side of myself. So I would just like pretend to like things even though I didn't actually enjoy them, you know, like just to try to hide, I think, like the parts of myself that I really like actually enjoyed. So
has that been reconciled with your family?
Not really. Like, yes and no. I think I've tried to have conversations. Unfortunately, like my mother has early onset Alzheimer's, and it's like progressed like quite quickly. So, you know, I think for me anyway, I've made peace. Like where I'm at with it is that I don't think that she can hurt me anymore. You know, and I really like have been trying to look at that of like, I really need to just like celebrate like what I have left, you know, but will I get closure on those sort of emotions? Probably not, because it's just something that we'll have a conversation and she doesn't remember it, you know? And my dad and I have had a lot of like open dialogue, which for a person that like my dad does not say like anything. Like my dad's such a quiet person. And so, you know, for him to like recognize, I just think a bit of the shame that he's like caused me in my life has been really good, especially to do with like my HIV. I hid my HIV status like from my parents for like, I think two years. Like I just told them because I was publicly coming out about my status, and it was just, I didn't really feel comfortable to have that conversation with them. So I think, you know, from that moment, being able to like share why I couldn't do that has been very healing for my father and I. And I see him like trying now to like make an effort to be a part of my life, you know, and I'm just like, I live in a world, and my life is a world that they don't understand. They're very like beautiful, simple people, you know, very like salt of the earth kind of people. So like working in fashion and, you know, expressing myself the way that I do, they don't get it, but at least they meet me with love. And even if they don't understand, they're not like, I think they're at a point now where they're not shaming me for who I am. It's like they're trying their best, and I have to respect that. So
good. Yeah, that's good. I know, heavy, heavy, heavy.
Yeah.
Do I go light or do I stay heavy?
No.
Because I want to talk about HIV.
I'm all about it. Bring it on.
Okay, good. The HIV diagnosis, I feel like, what year would that have been or around?
So I think it was 27 when I was diagnosed with HIV. So.
Things, I feel like the outlook and the way society and folks talk about HIV has changed drastically, and I hope that's not just in our little bubble.
Definitely, it's getting better.
It's getting better. How would you say your evolution has gone between being diagnosed and now?
So when I was diagnosed, like I didn't know anything about HIV. I was at work. I got a phone call from a doctor telling me that like my test results came back and that I was positive, which is like super like unprofessional, and like no doctor should ever do that with someone over the phone. Like that's such a vulnerable thing. And I just remember like sitting in a parking lot like in my car and just crying, being like, I'm 27 years old and I'm gonna die. Like this is the end of my life. Like there's so many things. I just kept thinking about all of the things that I wanted to do in my life and that I wouldn't be able to accomplish them because my only reference point was the 80s, where we lost like 33 million people to HIV and AIDS. And you know, and I had no idea that medication existed that could make me undetectable, meaning that I could live a very normal life and not transmit HIV to anyone else and like be in a normal relationship, that I wouldn't have that fear of like, you know, giving someone else HIV. And you know, so I think like in that first sort of moment, it was terrifying. I just like watched my whole life flash before my eyes and being so disappointed in myself, I think. And that's what was the hardest part of like me. I didn't love myself enough to respect my body enough that I caused myself to get that.
That was your
and that
thinking.
was sort of like my thought process in sort of that moment.
That's hard.
And that's like, you know, like how do you comprehend it? And you know, so you're like in this sort of moment, and I was like, you know, do I kill myself? Like, what do I do? Like, and then I also was like in the middle of a relationship with someone. We were dating for 3 years at this point, and so I'm like, now I have to tell this other person, maybe they have HIV too. And it was just like, I don't know, like it was just a whirlwind of sort of emotions that I had to really sort of face, and shame that I had to face kind of in these moments.
How did you get out of that? And was there someone, who was the person that started telling you, or did you have to find out for yourself that there is a whole life ahead of you with HIV?
I think it wasn't until I really got an amazing doctor. Her name is like Dr. Gian. She works at like, she's like connected with St. Michael's, but she has like a different, it's not like within the hospital. And it was just the first time I think that like a doctor made me feel like normal, I think, about it, and like just kind of was very like casual about it and really just like used inclusive language. I feel like she really changed my experience because like even when I got diagnosed, like I had to wait an entire month before I could see a specialist. So like, okay, now there's a whole month where I think I'm gonna die. And like, I just was like, you know, in one of the like deepest depressions of my life. And, you know, and so then finally getting help, but then like, I was then going to like an HIV clinic, and I just felt like there was no like empathy in this situation. I felt like a number. It was just like, okay, well, here's your medication. We're gonna like jab you with 1 million needles and take all this blood, and we're gonna give you all these vaccines. And like, just, there was no sort of like explanation to like why this was all happening. And like, no one checking in on my own like mental health, I think, at that point, that it was just like, okay, here's your medication, you'll be fine. And that's how it really felt. And I was like, ugh, like this is not, that, you know, yes, medication lets me live my very normal life, but I think that like healing really starts like after you take the medication and you become undetectable, because you then have to go into the psychological impacts of HIV on your life because it's so stigmatized, right?
Yes. So telling that partner had to be very hard.
Yeah.
And then telling partners in the future. So are you married right now?
We're engaged, but not married yet.
Those conversations, I know that there's some controversy over those conversations, and there's some discussion whether those conversations need to happen or not.
Yeah.
If you're going through that process and those conversations, is that, how difficult is it?
Yeah, in the beginning, absolutely super tough. You know, like you're already feeling, I think, so insecure in just who you are because you've had your identity sort of flipped upside down. So then now I have to like go and share this, like legally, I have to share this part of myself because like the law is still like quite loose, I feel, in Canada. So like technically speaking, like if I have an undetectable status, I don't necessarily have to tell someone about it. But that being said, the law again is so loose in the situation of like, you know, if a person like wanted to, they still probably could take me to court. They still could probably make me go through this process. Whether they would win or not, I don't know, based off of if I had an undetectable status. But do you want to put yourself at that risk of like having to go through this sort of like situation and like someone using it against you as a weapon? So it was tough. Like when I was dating, I literally would like text people or like put it in my profile and make sure that they confirmed with me via like text message, and I would take a screenshot of it.
Oh, wow.
Just to have backup, because I was so afraid that someone was going to like try to charge me for like a criminal offense or like manslaughter based off of my HIV status.
So you led with it.
Yeah, I had to. I mean, I wasn't necessarily like, you know, probably the first like 6 months, not necessarily. Like I was, you know, I'd maybe wait like a few dates in or like, you know, kind of thing. But it just, I had a moment where I was on a date with someone and it was going really well and we were back at my house, and then I ended up like telling him about my status, and he became like very physically violent with me. And like he thought that I had like murdered him because we were making out, and like not educated on that, you know, there's no way I can give you HIV by making out. Also, I'm undetectable, so it's like impossible. And like kind of from that moment on, I was like, no, like it needs to be the first thing. Like I cannot even like just allow my heart to even let someone in on a date or something like that without knowing that they're like cool with it and they know what undetectable means, and they've done a little bit of research on HIV. So yeah.
I imagine that would be as nerve-wracking as it is, way less nerve-wracking than waiting till a later time. But what a hard thing to have to navigate.
Totally.
That is so difficult.
It's tough because when you think about it, it's like, are you being like on your first date being like, I'm diabetic?
Can you imagine?
You know, like, no one's telling people that. You know, like, but like, you know, I get to live a way better life than someone who has diabetes, you know? And it's like, I don't know. I find it very like frustrating just how much like stigma can like change people's perspectives, right? And it's just really unfortunate.
Absolutely. Like imagine, if I had to date people and say, well, I've miscarried 2 kids and I, you know, so that they get a sense of my fertility requirements. Any of your personal health information, it's really difficult to share, but something that's so stigmatized, I can just imagine. I'm happy you've landed where you've landed, though. So how long have you been dating your fiance for?
So it's funny, it's only been 2 years, but we've known each other for 12. So like
friends first?
I friend-zoned Tyler for a really long time.
You friend-zoned Tyler. What was it? Was it were you sowing wild oats? Were you not sure? Were you like, or did you put Tyler on a pedestal and you were waiting for the moment that you could properly treat Tyler the way Tyler needs to be treated?
But I think the last part
you're gonna go with that one?
Because it's just like, it's one of these things, right? I think as humans, like, you know, like, it's not easy. Like we have a lot of scars and trauma and shame. And like, I think one of them a lot of the time is like our childhood trauma, or like the relationships that we develop with our parents and like people when we're very young. We very much like reflect that in the people that we date as adults. So if someone was like super interested in me and was like romantic and like I felt like was kind to me, I was like, stay away from me, because I want to have to chase after someone. I want someone to make me feel like shit, because that's just what I was comfortable with, and that felt safe to me, was like someone who wasn't interested in me. And so those were the types of people that I would chase after, and those were the people that I would date. But Tyler was like the opposite. He was like so kind and like just so romantic and like did so many nice things to me, but I was like afraid to be in a relationship with him, which is like, had to unbox all that.
Like, this is way too easy. No.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like people are like, oh, you know, it's like, oh, like they're, you know, people want like that spark or like that rush, but a lot of that is just like trauma being activated. And people don't realize that, like when people talk about spark, like I think there's a difference between like a deep love and like a love connection that you have with someone versus this sort of like spark that people kind of use sometimes. So Yeah, I don't know.
Totally. But you obviously do therapy because you
Yes.
have a very big and keen self-awareness. Like, you know exactly why you made the moves you made, and you know exactly why you're where you are at now.
Yeah, I'm all about like reclaiming my power, I think, over these sort of like moments in our life. Because, you know, I never wanted these sort of traumas in my life to like stop me from like experiencing joy and like chasing my dreams. And I guess I feel really lucky that I've always been able to like see that sort of at the end of the tunnel and like, and you know, and even with therapy, like therapy is like a newer thing for me just because like I also had like shame of just like allowing myself to like give myself that help that I needed, and that, you know, I often like relied on self-help books or like podcasts or like meditations that I would listen to like try to get that information. But I realized after like so many years of that, I needed like someone else to kind of give me like an unbiased kind of like feedback on my behavior or the scripts that I've created.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds to me also that you practice like radical acceptance. Like there's so many things in your life that it doesn't feel to me that you are in a position where you're saying this is happening to me. It seems to me that you're sort of guiding your life the way you want it to go. So that, you know, that's very empowering. So I'm wondering, like, what's next? What do you've accomplished so much. What else do you see in your future if you don't feel like it's superstitious to talk about this stuff?
Not at
Some
all.
people don't like to put like their vision board on Front Street because they don't want to jinx it.
Oh my gosh, I'm all about manifesting, so I think we just need to like put it out there.
Put it out there.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm all about that.
Yeah.
I feel like honestly, like I'm so excited at this sort of like moment in my life because getting to do like this whole TV thing is like, it's something that's so new to me, and I feel like I'm learning so much. So I'm really, really excited just to kind of continue to sort of grow this muscle of like, you know, of being on TV and getting to show like interviewing people and styling people. I'm also really hoping that like in the future I can also start designing again. I used to design when I was younger, but it was just more for me, and I really hope that sort of, in the future I can like launch like what is sort of like Myles Sexton's like clothing brand, because I still feel like there's gaps, I think, within the fashion industry for, I think, people who want gender neutral pieces. So, and like just inclusive pieces to different sizes and like shapes of bodies, because, you know, I think again, clothing is still very very one way. So yeah, I feel like those are like my two really big ones. And then we just, as like a labor of love, we just launched our podcast, Our Private Bits, with Tyler and I. And that was a big project. Like we were kind of working on it for a year before we launched it. So it just came out a couple weeks ago. So yeah, it's been very exciting.
How's that? So what is your schedule going to be like? Is it going to be an episode a week?
We're, one a week coming out.
It's a lot of work.
It is, for sure.
And you're working with your love.
I am.
How's that?
It's been, honestly, like with Tyler, you know, I think even within our relationship, you know, like we kind of are on both two spectrums of like trans identity, you know, him being a trans man and me being a non-binary trans person. And so like, you know, I think both of us like really haven't had a lot of voice, and not to say that like, you know, that trans women, they do get a little bit more emphasis, I would say, than especially trans men. I find like they're sort of just forgotten about because they're so passing a lot of the time. And so I'm just really, with the podcast, trying to like dig deeper into conversations that don't get to be had enough. And right now we're really focusing on Tyler and I's relationship and like his experience and you know, sort of my experience with things. But I can't wait to then like start bringing in guests, you know, to be a part of it as well. But yeah.
Is there anything that ever gets awkward between you two? Or is there anything that elicits conflict? I love to hear why people fight.
Yeah, I mean, Tyler and I have very different mindsets. You know,
do,
like Tyler transitioned when he was I think he was like maybe 16, like between the ages of like, you know, 14 and 16 was sort of his like beginning stages of his transition.
Yeah.
So, you know, going through that so young, like he was born in 1985, like he was very much like, I think like at the forefront of you know, like trans men at that time, especially in Toronto. There wasn't a lot of people that have gone through sort of that process. So I think we have a lot of conflicting sort of views, especially like within our community, you know, and you know, one of them that we were just recorded a podcast on recently was just like about, even for someone like myself who's non-binary, like being under the trans umbrella, and like we really had to like fight that out to like because we both, yeah, I mean, it's such a large conversation, but like, again, sometimes we just like have these differences of opinions based off of our own personal experiences. And like, I love then finding that sort of like middle ground again. And we do it on the podcast, which is amazing.
That's good.
So it's good to have, I think, someone that challenges you, because Tyler very much has that sort of opposite perspective of me a lot of the time. So,
and no one's a monolith. No one's a representative of an entire community. So there should be some disparity in opinion. There should be some controversy and some arguments, and I think that's healthy in a marriage. It's 100%. Healthy in a platonic relationship. It's just healthy.
Well, we sometimes limit ourselves, right? Like sometimes we also like only surround ourselves with a friend group that agrees with you, or like, I always see people being like, unfollow me if you don't believe in this, and I'm like, okay, like. Yes, but like, sometimes you need those differences of opinions, and you need to be challenged in these situations so that you can like find a common ground, and then you both collectively grow.
Yes.
If you're just like using an algorithm to only like feed you things that you believe in, like you're kind of staying stagnant, and I don't believe in that. So
you get caught in an echo chamber.
Exactly.
Is what happens, and it's really hard for me to get out of the echo chamber.
Totally, it feels comfortable.
Oh my God, it's so comfortable, and it's like it's so affirming.
Yes.
But you got to get out. You got to get out every once in a while. And my husband definitely drags me out.
Does he?
Oh, boy.
What do you not see the most eye to eye on?
My husband is the kind of guy that's going to ask questions that I would be like, please don't ask this in mixed company.
Okay.
So he's just going to, like, he's going, and it's not even playing devil's advocate.
Yeah.
It comes from a place of curiosity.
Totally.
And I think what's scary about what's happening right now in social media and even in, more legacy media is that there's certain ideas and thoughts that need to sort of fit into very strict categories. And as soon as you start to veer outside of that, there's a threat.
Totally.
And I understand where the threat is coming from, because there is so much hate for everything.
So much.
So it's like you don't even want to entertain other ways of thinking, because you're afraid it's going to snowball into something dangerous.
Yes.
So he's constantly getting me to like slow down and just think, just entertain. Is there another way of coming at this? Is there another perspective? And it frustrates me to no end, but I also value it.
Totally.
I very much value it.
I love that.
So it's good. Okay, so Cass, is there, like, I feel like we've had a good conversation, but is there anything anyone in the room wants to ask Myles? Like, I kind of want to know what your favorite snack is. I'm big on that. Like, if you had to pick, your top three favorite foods, what's on the list?
Tacos for sure.
Yes.
Yes, I'm like a big taco person. I love like a good, like a homemade, like lemongrass chicken kind of Asian moment. I'm really into. What else do we make a lot of?
What about desserts? You like desserts?
Oh my God, I have the biggest sweet tooth in the entire world. It's like been so hard. I like joke with Tyler. I'm like, stop making me so happy, because like all I want to do is eat desserts all the time, or he'll like surprise me with things. So donuts are like my weakness. I could like literally like eat my way through a donut shelf. Like, it's so good.
Do you have a special brand of donut? Like, are you a Krispy Kreme?
I do like Krispy Kreme, but so I'm super lactose intolerant, and I found this amazing donut place up in Barrie, of all places. It's called like Donuts. Donuts. And they're like all vegan. I feel like they're even better than regular donuts. Like they're just so fluffy, and like there's so much flavor. Every time I'm like, I'm just gonna go to the grocery store that's like next to the donut shop and not tell anyone.
In your car with half a dozen donuts.
Yeah, Tyler's like, why are you going to Barrie for groceries? Like, there's a grocery store down the road. I'm like, just for the donuts.
That's awesome. Okay, some tacos, some donuts, some lemongrass
what are
chicken.
Your favorites?
I'm going to go, so my favorite combo of all time is going to be a patty and cocoa bread. So Jamaican ancestry, Jamaican parents. I grew up feeling this was the biggest treat, because my dentist was very close to a patty shop.
Okay.
And I really, really dislike going to the dentist.
So does Tyler.
Did back then, still a little iffy about it now.
Okay.
I love my hygienist, Svetlana, if you're watching. Her and I, we vibe. So I like to go hang out with Svetlana, but I don't love the dentist experience. But when I grew up, my dad would always take us to the patty shop after the dentist. So it's also associated with such a lovely memory. My mouth would be frozen, and I'd be like, getting into this patty and cocoa bread, like piping hot patty was amazing. So I love that, and I love desserts, but chocolate, Myles. chocolate, chocolate, chocolate. It could be my personality.
Really?
I have a problem. Yes, like chocolate donuts, chocolate bars.
Oh my gosh.
Chocolate ice cream, but I'm not
Yeah.
so much of an ice cream girl. But yeah, chocolate, I'm into it. Love it.
Have you ever been to like a cacao farm? Like where
I haven't.
I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
It is like, it just made me have a whole new like appreciation for chocolate.
chocolate.
Yeah.
I'd be into
definitely
it.
look it up. If you ever go like south sometime, we
Yeah.
went when we were in Costa Rica, and it was like, it was so cool going to this like indigenous farm that grows like cacao, and they start from these like tiny little like almost orchid looking flowers and then grow into these huge pods. You're like, what?
I need to go there and understand,
It's really cool.
and I'd probably like slow down a
Exactly.
little bit, understanding the preciousness of how it's
I was like
created.
hand scooping cacao in my mouth. It was so good.
It's been such a joy speaking with you, Myles. And I mean,
likewise.
I feel like we're all better off because you have gone through this journey, because you really do spread your joy and your good energy everywhere you go. So thank you so much.
Oh, I appreciate you so much.
We love you. And if you have been watching, we want to know who you would like me to speak with next. We have so many incredible personalities on the Cityline roster, so make sure you subscribe and then boss me around. Tell me who you want me to speak with next. You can even give me questions if you want. I will ask them if I like them. Take care, everyone. See you next time. It was so good speaking with you. So good. I see your fashion.